Chapter 206, Sword and Flower. The border pass city is mostly used for garrison troops. The general's mansion was built in the center of the city. It was the residence of the generals stationed in Xinzhou and stationed at Yanmen Pass in the past dynasties. It covers an area in a small city like Xinzhou, which is already very wide. Yanlin took them all the way to the door. The city has already received the news that Mr. Xie has come to supervise the army, and the generals of the rank in the army are already waiting inside. He dismounted at the door, handed the reins to the sergeant on the side, and helped Zhang Xuning, who was about to dismount, and said to Xie Wei, who came out of the car, and then waved his hand. "Sir, please." Xie Wei was not wearing an official uniform, only plain clothes. Others only heard that there was a big official in Beijing in the border city in the past 2 days, and they have always wondered what kind of person they are, and now when they see it, they can't help but be stunned for a moment, and then they are amazed. Such a person turned out to be an official? Xie Wei didn't look at the others, and after getting out of the car, he stepped up the steps with Yanlin, walked into the general's mansion, and only asked, "Do you want to listen to the discussion together?" Zhang Xuning was stunned for a moment before reacting. "Mr. Ask me." Xie Wei glanced at her and didn't speak. Zhang Xuning shuddered inexplicably, feeling that Xie Zhuan's eyes were chilling, and her back straightened a little, but she subconsciously glanced at Yanlin, thought about the relationship between the two, and felt that she still didn't want to get involved in this matter, so she said, "No. Where do I understand? Just let Yanlin find someone to take me to rest first." This mouthful of Yanlin can hear the people on the side breaking out in a cold sweat. She didn't realize it. Yanlin didn't have any opinions, so he called the old housekeeper of the general's mansion and asked him to take Zhang Xuning to the guest room. Xie Wei waved his hand to the sword book and said, "You also follow." Jianshu bowed his head and said, "Yes." He stepped back from Xie Wei's side and automatically followed Zhang Xuning. This made Zhang Xuning a little confused. But after thinking about it, it was said that Yanlin had already taken charge of the military, but after all, the time was still short. Who knew if there would be any accidents at this time, so it was always right to sail carefully and send someone to follow her. She didn't say anything, and turned to follow the butler. Yanlin looked at the sword book following behind her, but for some reason she suddenly frowned, and felt that vague strangeness again. He turned his gaze to Xie Wei. Xie Wei didn't react, just said, "Let's go too," and passed through the hall and headed for the council hall. There are 100,000 garrisons at the border pass, and there are more than a dozen generals with names and surnames, and they also have to count the local state officials in Xinzhou, so it was quite lively when Xie Wei went to see him. He was calm, but the people were somewhat apprehensive. After all, seeing that winter is coming, they have never heard of a precedent for anyone to take the initiative to provoke a battle in winter, and they all have their own worries. Yanlin arrived in Xinzhou a month ago. Single-handed. At that time, he had neither an order nor a holy decree, and he was even a criminal minister who left the exile land without authorization, but fortunately, not many people knew him at the border gate, so he took this opportunity to understand the situation at the border pass. The Marquis of Yanji originally led the troops to fight. Many of the border generals were his father Yan Mu's old subordinates. That would have been a good thing. But after the accident in the home mansion, many people were also affected by this. Either they were not allowed to go further in the army, or they were removed and demoted, and the 100,000 garrisons in Xinzhou naturally belonged to the Xiao faction. So on the day he first took power, in order to appoint orders in the future, Yanlin did one thing. Chopped. Zhang Xuning walked in the direction of the guest room with the housekeeper, and on the way, she couldn't help but ask about the border city, but she listened to something that Yanlin didn't say when she was on the street, and she was stunned for a while. "Ready to the battle." The old housekeeper is old, His waist is stiff, but he is not sorry for the unlucky ghost who lost his head, and said angrily, General Yan has only arrived in Xinzhou, isn't this a great thing for the people? That's a good kill, you deserve it. Zhang Xuning was silent suddenly. The old housekeeper still chattered, seeing that other Tatars are about to fight, a bunch of rice buckets still want to avoid the war. Yesterday was the eldest princess who went to make peace, and tomorrow those dogs and things can come and plunder the girls in the city. A general who doesn't want to fight is a good general, but a general who doesn't dare to fight will be dragged out and cut down like this. It's late when you came, it's going to be a few days in the morning, and the blood on the head DS platform outside the city hasn't dried yet, but it's beautiful. Jianshu quietly glanced at Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning was thoughtful. The old housekeeper had already arrived at the front of the guest room, and after talking for a long time, he reacted, and hurriedly bowed down and said, Look at me, I talk a lot when I'm old, and I don't know if these words should be said in front of the nobles, don't blame me. Zhang Xuning was just a little surprised. But there's nothing surprising about it. If you want to gain a firm foothold in such a place and truly take charge of the military, decisive means are indispensable. Only by killing chickens and setting an example can we make the rest of those people have relatives, and can we really convince those old departments of the home mansion in the army. She's just a little pity for the old boys. Alone in such a place, when you are isolated, you have to make all kinds of decisions. I don't know how many hardships you encounter, but when you meet her, you don't mention a word, as if everything is going well. Zhang Xuning thanked the old housekeeper and entered the house by herself, and found that this room had been carefully arranged, and it was not as rough as it looked from the outside, and there was even a newly bought rouge on the makeup. She couldn't help but smile. Turning his head, he said to Jianshu, I won't go out even if I'm in the house, you go back and follow your husband first, in case you have any orders, you can take care of it. Jianshu hesitated for a moment, probably feeling that such an unfamiliar environment in Xinzhou was worrying, so he bowed down to her and didn't say anything, so he took his leave and turned back in the direction of the council hall. Xie Wulai naturally learned about the situation in the city first. These generals were most worried about the situation of food and grass. The imperial court sent Xie Wei to be the overseer, but in fact, in order to prevent mutiny at the border pass, naturally it would not prepare any food and grass, and it can be said that there was not even the slightest rumor. But Xie Weian had other plans. Tatar must be beaten, and Shenzai must also be saved, so he did not panic at all when he responded to the questions about grain and grass, but only said that the grain and grass were already on the way, so please don't worry. He said that the officials from the capital had said it, and everyone was a little relieved. After the discussion, they only said that a banquet would be held in the evening to thank the danger and wash the dust, and they all retired. Only Xie Wei and Yan Lin were left in the hall. The tea in the teacup has only a little temperature left. Xie Wei took a sip of it. Yan Lin stared at him, and there was a rare hesitation in his eyes, and even a different kind of look. He tried to discern something from his eyebrows, trying to make some clues with his father's anticipation and watchfulness for the past 2 years. At the beginning, it was difficult for the Yanji Marquis mansion to rob the family and exterminate the clan, but fortunately, there were people behind him to help. This person is Xie Wei. But what does he have to do with the home mansion? On the surface, he has nothing at all, just the gentleman when he entered the palace to study. At the beginning, when his father was ill, Yan Lin had his own guess and asked him, "Who is Mr. Xie?" My father coughed heavily, but he wouldn't say more. But with tears in his eyes, he said to him, "It is the one you have to believe completely." At that time, he had the answer in his heart. Yan Lin was silent for a long time before he said, "Over the years, thank you mister for taking care of me." Xie Wei covered his eyes. "Is Master Ho okay?" Yan Lin said, "In previous years, there were always some things in the capital, and the root of the disease fell early, and the road to Huangzhou was more serious. But after I got there, the days were hard, and then I was idle again, as if I had opened some knots in my heart, but I was raised. When I left Huangzhou, Boss Lu came to take care of him, and the people had already settled down. Xie Wei nodded and stopped talking. He was never an easy person to get close to. Yan Lin also found it hard to think that the old gentleman was actually his eldest brother, blinked, couldn't change the title, and asked, "Mr. is here, what should I do with the court?" Xie Wei said, "There is still a period of time before the border passes away from the capital, and it is impossible to cut off the news exchange even if Xinzhou is under control of such a big thing as a war. Therefore, the war must be resolved quickly, otherwise when the imperial court reacts, it may be said that it will be attacked on the back. But if you can take down the Tatars and rescue the princess before the court reacts, you can win a move." At that time, I only said that when I arrived in Dexinzhou, the border garrison had already fallen under your control, and it was really beyond my power to change, so I had to go with the flow. You are both in charge of the military and the hearts of the people, but the court will not dare to tear your face with you, and will try every means to recruit you and make you a duke and earl." Yan Lin suddenly frowned. "Duke Earl?" Xie Wei looked at him with a smile. "Don't want it?" Yan Lin calmly, "I don't want to." Xie Wei gently put down the teacup, and the curvature of his lips became a little more unfathomable, and he only said, "It's easy if you don't want it." The two didn't talk for long. After saying a few words to Yan Lin, he came out of the conference hall and went to his guest room, and after asking Zhang Xuning about the situation, he took a little wash and rested for 2 hours. When it was getting late, someone from outside invited me to go out again. The banquet was set up in the general's mansion. Everyone up and down knows that there are nobles in Beijing. In addition to the fairy-like Mr. Xie, the most eye-catching is the second Miss Ning. Everyone didn't know her identity, name, and surname, but they heard that the people who came with her called her like this, so they followed the same name, and they all thought that her surname was Ning, and she was in the second line of the family. How special General Yan treated her, in just one afternoon, it had already spread all over Xinzhou city. No one in the house dared to slow down. In addition, Yan Lin had an order, and he picked up the wind at night, so he naturally invited her to attend. The courtyard outside has been renovated for a long time, and the tables in the original conference hall have been newly placed, and rare good wine and good food have been served. When Zhang Xuning came, everyone was almost there. Xie Wei sat down. Yan Lin was across from him. She pondered that she had only come to eat and drink, and had not gone to join in the fun, but had only sat close to the female dependents brought by some other officials and generals, and listened to them tell some interesting stories about the border passes. There is no doubt that Zhang Xuning is definitely the focus of attention among these ladies and ladies. People can't help but wonder about her identity. She didn't report her door, only said that she was Xie Wei's student, Yan Lin's friend. Everyone was amazed when they heard it, and they came to toast her to drink. Zhang Xuning really didn't drink much. But this road is difficult, and finally to the border, and when Yu Fangyin and Lucien then arrange the grain and grass baggage, they can attack Tatar and rescue the princess. The woman at the border is really bold. Even the woman who had already entered the inner house was not as disciplined as in the army, and she was quite open, seeing that she did not really refuse, but became more and more vigorous to persuade her to drink. After Zhang Xuning drank 2 more glasses, she suddenly had an alarm. She didn't dare to be too presumptuous on such an occasion, and after all, she was not a girl who grew up in the Northland, so she couldn't resist it, so she hurriedly found an excuse to blow the wind and sober up, so she slipped out first. On the side of the generals, they also drank 3 rounds. Yan Lin saw Zhang Xuning go out from a distance, and couldn't help but be a little worried, so he said no company to the people on the side and the other side, and then put down the wine cup and went out of the hall. There was a good-natured laugh behind him. Who hasn't heard of the rumors in the city today? Although I don't know the identity of the second girl of Nanning, I can guess that it should be Yan Lin's sweetheart. Seeing a person walk out, can you still not know what he is doing? During the banquet, someone ridiculed, the hero is sad to pass the beauty pass. Others agreed. Only Siewei looked at it coldly and picked up the wine cup. Everyone present knows that this is the emperor of the dynasty, and he doesn't dare to slack off at all, and he is very eye-catching, and when he sees him holding up the wine cup, he immediately comes up with a smile to toast. Siewei clung to the wine cup and did not refuse. His fingers are as slender as jade bamboo, and his drinking posture is also very elegant, but his expression on his face is slightly bleak, and he is not enthusiastic about people. The generals did not dare to be presumptuous, but they were afraid of him and became more and more cautious. There are lanterns hanging in the corridor, and there are people who are waiting to be sent inside and out. Zhang Xuning came out of the hall and sat on the beauty in the corner to blow the wind. The wind in the north is cold, and it makes people sober as soon as they blow the noodles. Yan Lin came out of the hall, and at a glance recognized her back, which was not very distinct in the dim place, and was about to walk forward, but when she turned her eyes, she saw the small caryophyllum blooming on the edge of the porch. The outside is white, and the inside is purple. Although the flower is only larger than the copper coin, it is also delicate and cute in a cold day like the Northland, and it is extremely rare. He stopped and looked at it for a moment, remembered something, smiled, and bent down to pluck a small leaf, attached to a thin stem about the length of a finger. After turning around between his fingers, he turned his hand towards Zhang Xuning. I waited until I got closer, and then I coughed. Zhang Xuning looked back and saw him, couldn't help but raise her eyebrows in surprise, stood up and smiled. Why did you come out too? Yan Lin said, I see you come out. Zhang Xuning raised her eyes, looked up at him slightly, and muttered, This is Zinzou, you are the commander of the 3 armies, where is there a reason to leave the table casually, so willful? Beware of Mr. Turn back and scold. Yan Lin thought, what is there to worry about? Obviously, it has been almost a day since I came, but at one time it is a discussion, and at another time it is an arrangement, except for the words that are not marginal on the way to come, there is actually no opportunity to talk in detail. He looked at her, are you okay for the past 2 years? In the distance, the sound of staggering in the hall was heard. It's quiet up close. The lantern shook gently in the slightly cold wind, and it also shook gently in Zhang Xuaning's sight. She curled her lips and smiled, how could I be bad? After a long silence, he asked, what about you? Yan Lin's dark eyes were illuminated by a faint light, a little warm, and he only said slowly, it's not as bad as I thought. For a while, he was relatively speechless. In the dark blue night sky, the moon hangs high. It was as bright as a plain light, and as bright as frost. Yan Lin took another step closer before asking, why did you come with Mr. Xie? Zhang Xuning thought of Siewei and didn't speak. Yan Lin looked at her for a long time, and asked, where is Zhang Shat? At this moment, Zhang Xuning seemed to have been hit by something. She hadn't remembered this person for a while. At first hearing the name, a dull pain that was already unfamiliar came over her, and her eyes moistened a little, but she didn't know what to say, and lowered her eyes a little gloomily. Actually, there is no need to speak. Yan Lin accompanied her through those days of messing around in the streets and alleys, and he didn't know her well, but he could also distinguish her emotions and guess that there was probably no good result. After hesitating for a moment, he turned out the caryophyllus and handed it to her. He only smiled, what a big deal. Oh, I just saw it for you, don't be unhappy. In the quiet of the night, the small petals tremble. Jiang Xunning's eyes fell from his face to the flowers, and he remembered the rainy night a long time ago, the string of winter jasmine, and the tears rolled down his eyelashes, but he only looked at him and did not reach out to take it. Yan Lin suddenly got angry. Angry with her like this. For a moment, he wanted to hold her tightly and rub her into his arms, but he was not a reckless young man, so he only said, "Even if there is no Zhongsha, it is not me, is it?" Jiang Xuning didn't dare to answer. Yan Lin smiled sharply. He looked at the caryophyllus for a moment, and finally raised his hand to pinch the flower at the top, and only handed out the thin branch with a leaf, which was spoiled, helpless, and a shallow sadness. "In the end, count me as a piece of my mind, don't let it down." Jiang Xuning took it over. The tip of her nose was sour, the bottom of her eyes were astringent, and she almost choked up in response. Yan Lin rubbed her head with a smile. "I haven't seen you for 2 years, why are you still like this? No wonder people don't want you." Jiang Xuning thought, "Do you want Zhongsha and me to do it?" It's just that although he was full of sadness, he was also disturbed by the mess he pressed on his head, and he laughed for a while, and hated him. "If Lord Zhang listens to you like this, no matter how good your temper is, you will have to beat you." Yan Lin looked at her and didn't refute, but said, "It's cold outside, go back." Jiang Xuning was tired from pondering, and didn't want to go back to the banquet, so she nodded and wanted to go back to the guest room to sleep. It's just that she takes 2 steps forward and stops. Turning around, holding the thin flower branch in his hand, he looked at Yan Lin, who was becoming more and more mature after a few steps, and said very seriously, "Yan Lin, I'm not unhappy, I'm really happy. I'm glad that you're still the boy who picked the flowers for me. Though I'm no longer the girl who can accept your flowers with peace of mind." She went far. The porch is lit as before. Yan Lin stood up, his figure was stretched to the ground, his fingers had grown a thin layer of cocoons because he had held the sword for many years, and the small purple and white caryophyllus hung low between his fingers, silent. It took a long time before I smiled slowly. Chapter 207, Acid. Jiang Xuning fell asleep when she returned to the house, reluctantly washed her face, and went to bed to sleep while it was cold. When I woke up the next morning, it was already dark. The whole general's mansion was quiet, and I couldn't hear the sound of last night's staggered thoughts, and I thought that the banquet was over, and she got up with a yawn, and finally missed the time to eat breakfast, so she asked someone to bathe herself, and only slowly cleaned up, and prepared to eat again at noon. It's just that she didn't expect it, so she dried her hair, and the sword book came outside. Jiang Xuning was shocked somehow. Before Jianshu could speak, her eyes lit up a little. "Mr. looking for me?" Jianshu was stunned by her, paused for a moment, and then replied, "Yes." Jiang Xuning lowered her voice again and continued to ask, "Did your husband cook food?" Jianshu glanced at her faintly, and didn't know whether to confide in her or not, but recalling the eyes of his own husband staring at the table of dishes, his back was chilling, and he didn't dare to say more, so he just nodded and said, "It's done." When Jiang Xuning heard this, she immediately jumped up, clapped her hands and said, "I know that Mr. is a god descending to earth, and a saint has come to the world, and Guanyin Bodhisattva does not have such a good heart as him. There was nothing good to eat along the way, and the peach cake made me tired of eating it. At the banquet last night, I thought that the cook in Yanlin's mansion was not very good. I didn't expect Mr. to make food today. You wait for me, I'll come." Book of Swords. "You're not a small heart." Jianshu answered yes and stood outside, waiting for her to clean up and stop, and then led the people all the way through the courtyard and the middle hall to the front of the house. A few gray and black bricks are built under the eaves, and an evergreen tree is planted inside. The house is also unremarkable. It's just that there are few people in this place, and it is exceptionally quiet, and it is probably a good room that Yan Lin specially chose for Siawei. At this time, several dishes were already on the Kong table by the window. Siawei sat on the left side, a glass of wine in his hand. I heard footsteps outside, and before anyone came in, Zhang Xuaning's greeting voice had already come in. "Sir, the student is here for you." Zhang Xuaning grabbed the door and glanced inside first. Sure enough, I saw Siawei sitting there. This is the same as when they quietly met in the kitchen of Jinan Mansion, not to mention that the good dishes have already been put on the table, and she doesn't need to make any more miscellaneous fires. Zhang Xuaning's eyes are a little happy. Siawei's eyes were light and ethereal. He raised his eyes to look at her, and said with a smile, "Come in." Zhang Xuaning came in from kindness. Not only did she come in, but she also sat opposite Siawei very consciously, picked up the pair of ivory chopsticks that were resting on the right side of the table, looked down at the table of dishes, and was overjoyed. There are 5 or 6 of them. The color of the smoked pigeon is dark red, the white jade tofu is tender and juicy, the shredded chicken and white fungus soup is bright, the white duck tongue is exquisite, and what is even more amazing is that there is a plate of lamb meat in the middle, and I don't know how to use the sauce of the brush. Each piece is soaked in the luster of oil, and some shallots are set on the side. Just a few smells wafted out, and people can't help but drool. Zhang Xuaning was almost about to stretch out her chopsticks, but when she looked up, she saw Siawei sitting opposite her drinking, and couldn't help but be stunned, looked carefully in front of him, looked at her chopsticks again, and wondered, "Why don't you have chopsticks over there?" Siawei looked at her and said, "I was full yesterday." Zhang Xuaning pondered what this meant, not hungry, raised the spoon and turned around, and said tentatively, "That's all made for me." Siawei took a sip of wine and smiled, "Are you my student?" Inexplicably, Zhang Xuaning felt a chill behind her. But at present, Siawei's appearance has not changed much compared to usual, and he has treated her so well in recent times, which has made his original vigilance against this person disappear, and he has not thought deeply about it at this moment. She was so happy that she raised her chopsticks and took a piece of mutton and put it in her mouth. The meat is really tender and delicious. Merely. Does this taste a little sour? Zhang Xuaning tasted it, thinking that it was because the sauce was relatively unique, and she couldn't tell what the new flavor was, so she had to try it to find out. So I quickly sandwiched another piece. However, when she took a bite and chewed into her mouth, several streams of sour water mixed with the fat of the mussels, all of which were squeezed out at once, filling her entire mouth. Gross. I don't know how many years of old vinegar has been put aside, and the sour smell stimulated her face to wrinkle, and she almost immediately covered her mouth and spit out the piece of meat towards the dishes on the side. However, the sour taste is still in the mouth. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't even speak, and hurriedly reached out to serve the water. What a smell. Siawei handed over the wine cup he had drunk 2 sips of. Zhang Xuaning didn't even look at it, so she took it and raised her head and drank it. And then, the already crumpled slap face instantly turned iron blue. She choked and threw away the wine cup, covered her throat and coughed violently. Cough, 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 thank you, cough, cough, cough. It's like tuberculosis. Her face was flushed, extremely sour and extremely spicy, all in one mouth, like a ball of fire on top of her head. She couldn't vomit if she wanted to. I can't die on the spot. Siawei looked at her with no surprise at all. What? It's sour. Do you want to kill for money? Zhang Xuaning has never eaten such a sour thing in her 2 lives. Hearing what the other party said, where can you not understand? This is a deliberate treatment of her. I only hated myself for not paying attention to the Tao. The surname Xia is ruthless, and she is clearly a hell devil. Which trick does she dare to think that he is a fairy saint and has a good heart? The smell was indescribable. Jiang Xuning almost fainted. Where did she have any time to answer Xie Wei's words? She only looked for tea all over the house, but she didn't even find a teapot, so she pressed her throat, coughed vigorously, and ran outside with the doorframe. Xie Wei glanced at her and didn't stop her. The swords, pianos, swords, and books are all in the courtyard. Both of them heard the movement of the cabinets in the room. However, when I saw Jiang Xuning coming out with the appearance of being poisoned, I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart. Jiang Xuning is more familiar with Jianzhu, and a few coughs have made her hoarse, and at this moment, she is even more afraid of being heard by someone in the room who has a heart and eyes smaller than a needle, so she grabbed Jianzhu and lowered her voice and said, "Quick, bring a glass of water." As she said that, she wanted to retch again. Jianzhu's eyelids jumped, but he didn't dare to be held by her for too long, so he was busy serving water. "It's a big teacup." Jiang Xuning took it and poured most of it, only to feel better, but the sour and spicy taste still left a lot in the throat, and it couldn't be removed no matter what. "The surname Xie is going to die?" Jianzhu looked at her expression, his eyelids jumped, and he whispered, "Mr. is not happy, and it is not delicious to cook, and there are also things." Jiang Xuning almost got out of anger. "Is that unpalatable to be described? It's like mixing a cup of vinegar with the fiercest burning knife." She raised her head and drank the remaining half of the tea, then handed it back to the sword book, waved her hand and walked outside. Jianzhu asked, "Sir's side?" Jiang Xuning glanced back at Xie Wei's house, only to feel that the whole room was emitting black gas outside. Where did he dare to take half a step inside? As she spoke, her voice drifted a little. The whole person seemed to be stepping on the clouds, his body was weak, his feet were weak, and he walked out of the corridor as if he had only his last breath left. The sword and the sword looked at each other. After a while, I heard a calm voice in the room, "Sword book." The sword book struck a stir and went in. The table was full of food that barely touched. Xie Wei stood on the side with a clear body, and lightly uncovered the snow-white brocade on the side, wiping a few drops of vinegar wine on his fingers, as if he hadn't done anything just now, and said lightly, "It's all brought to feed the dog." Jianzhu's scalp was numb, and he said, "Yes." He cleaned up everything on the table and took it out. Dayakan glanced at it and shook his head. Jianzhu's heart palpitated, and he lowered his voice and said, "Because of the second girl Ning and the prince." Dayakan said, "It's almost inseparable." Jianzhu wondered, "But who was silent before?" Dayakan said, "If it can be done early, where is the use of waiting until now? Mr. is not bothered." Jianzhu motioned for him to look at his hand, then this. Dayakan looked at it and stopped talking. The two looked at each other again. In the end, it was the sword book that accepted his fate first, walked over from the side, and had to deal with these things that had taken a lot of effort to make all morning. After just 2 steps, he stopped again, hesitated, turned his head and asked, "Dayakan, you say, if the dog wants to eat it, what should I do?" Obviously, this is an extremely likely problem. Dayakan was silent, thought seriously for a while, and said, "Either the dog dies or you die." Book of Swords. Chapter 208, Self-Deception. On Jiang Xuning's way back, she happened to bump into Yan Lin. Look at the direction is to go to Xie Wei's side. Seeing her posture of taking poison with a green face and stepping on clouds, he couldn't help but be stunned, and first glanced behind her before asking, "What's wrong? Just came back from Mr. Xie's side." Jiang Xuning was sour in her throat and even in her whole stomach. She really didn't want to say a word, so she waved her hand and said, "Mr. Xie doesn't seem to be happy today, you have to be careful if you want to go to him." Yan Lin was confused. Jiang Xuning almost couldn't control her words and retched, and hurriedly said goodbye to Yan Lin and went to her room. This made Yan Lin a little confused. He looked at her back for a moment, thoughtful. But go to Xie as usual. Dao's Hong inevitably encountered Jianshu again, and he also asked Jianshu what he was doing with the food. Jianshu smiled, not very good looking, and said to feed the dogs. Yan Lin felt strange again. Soon arrived outside the house, I saw Daokan standing outside, bowing slightly, and he stepped forward to bow to the door outside the house, and said, Yan Lin is here to see Mr. And the men of Xie were inside, and called him in. After he entered, he looked at Xie's expression, and it was clear that the clouds were light and light, no different from ordinary times, and he couldn't see what Zhang Xuning said before unhappy. The two were talking about grain and grass. I saw that it was already winter. The weather is getting colder and colder in the north. Since there is going to be a war, if there is less than a day of food and grass, there will be no end in everyone's hearts. And according to their original plan, Lucien, who was supposed to arrive today, has not heard from him for a long time, which is really worrying. Xie also paid attention to the news of the grain and grass baggage, and knew everything about it, so he only said, Lucien didn't bring anything in front, and the people in Ren's salt field pressed the next few days, and it was the real grain and grass that was in charge. It doesn't matter if Lucien doesn't arrive on time, just the people from Ren's salt field in the back will arrive on time. Lucien has some calculations in his heart, and there is no need to worry about him. The meaning of the words is very clear. Anyway, Lucien was not responsible for transporting grain and grass, so there was no pity that he died on the road in an accident. Fortunately, Lucien himself is not here, otherwise he would have to be angry when he heard what he said. Yan Lin finally vaguely heard a bit of unpleasant from these words. Xie was slightly aware and asked, have something to say? Yan Lin raised his eyes and said, when I came here, I met Ningning, and when I saw that she was not very comfortable, I told me that Mr. seemed to be in a bad mood today. Ningning. Xie's long fingers flipped through the page of Taoism under his hand. Yuan Shan raised his eyebrows like light ink, smiled as if he didn't care, and said softly, the little girl is not very obedient, just treat it, I don't have anything wrong. Yan Lin looked at him and didn't speak. Xie turned his eyes and glanced at him, but he didn't seem to realize that he had said something wrong, and he was still very indifferent, as if he had nothing to do. He uncovered the stubble and went to talk about various matters in the army. Asterisk. What's wrong with the surname Xie? After Zhang Xuning returned to the house, she rinsed her mouth several times in a row, and put a few sweet candies into her mouth before she could barely suppress the sour gas. But the acid pressure went down, but doubt slowly emerged. She didn't guess at all? Not really. Sometimes Xie makes things quite obvious. It would be too false to say that she couldn't guess the slightest clue. But if you guess too clearly, you will inevitably add to your own blockage. It's better to pretend to be a little confused. After all, Xie Juan is also a person who knows measure, just do not say anything, and probably know that some window paper cannot be pierced. It's really punctured, and everyone is embarrassed. So she wondered if this person was unhappy in her heart, she wouldn't have tossed her for too long. Besides, he wanted to toss, is she still like this time, stupidly sent to the door to let him straighten? Zhang Xuning felt that this kind of thing would not happen once. So she was relieved. Half an hour ago, I had eaten enough vinegar at Xie's side, and half an hour later, I was already like a person who had nothing to do, and asked the kitchen to make a few good dishes for me, suppressing the shock. The next day, Xie really didn't ask anyone to come to find him. Zhang Xuning walked around the city and bought a small spinning top. On the third day, Xie and Yan Lin went out of the city to inspect the garrison of the soldiers, and Zhang Xuning took the maid to play the leaf card for a night. On the fourth day, Xie summoned the generals of the army to discuss the matter. Jiang Xuning found the best restaurant in the city, and drank 2 glasses. Day 5. On the 5th day, Xie Wei was finally free. Early in the morning, Jiang Xuning opened her eyes, and the voice of the sword book invited her as if she was urging her outside. She was scared to wake up with a single stir. Although he tried all kinds of excuses, he made up his mind not to fall twice in the same pit, and his will to refuse was very resolute, but he didn't hold up the quiet sentence of the sword book. Mr. said, "If you don't want to go decently, then it's okay to tie it up." Jiang Xuning gave in. She never expected that in addition to digging pits for people to jump, there was also such a shameless and coercive method, which was simply despicable and cheap. When I arrived at the house, I naturally saw another table of good dishes. Jiang Xuning was frightened as if she had tested poison. However, unexpectedly, this time it was really a crispy table of good dishes. Sour is appetizing sour, spicy is mouth-watering spicy, crispy meat rolled in oil soaked in white soup with floating green vegetables, a bite from the throat to the stomach, the chicken dipped in the pepper and the round, tender green peas fried on a plate, bibimbap after a few spoonfuls from the lips to the tip of the tongue. At first, she looked at Xie Wei like an out-and-out evil ghost, and after eating, she looked at him again and felt like a saint who saved the suffering. After this meal, Xie Wei seemed to be idle, but Yan Lin was so busy that his feet didn't touch the ground, and he was always not in the house. I also know that war is imminent. As a general, it is impossible for him to be idle. So in the next few days, Jiang Xuning had a meal to eat, and she ate happily every time, as if Xie Wei's anger had disappeared, and she pondered that she had simply forgotten the nightmare meal before. Unexpectedly, on this day, Xie Wei suddenly asked her, "Now you dare to let go of your courage to eat again?" Jiang Xuning shuddered, almost choking to death by the ball in her throat. Xie Wei handed her a glass of water. She coughed twice after drinking before laughing. "Mr. Sage is heartfelt, and he doesn't have to cook for others. If this person eats it, she should be grateful. Even if there is a fault, it must be her fault." That's a flattering thing to say. Xie Wei listened to it in his heart. He curled his lips and smiled. "You really don't remember to eat?" Jiang Xuning said in her heart, "Isn't that the result you want to see after giving a nest of sweet dates after a stick? Why are you still sour?" She pretended not to understand. He just said in a daze, "Who asked Mister to cook this good dish? It's so good that I can't remember it if I want to." Xie Wei hated her smirk, turned the wine cup in his hand, and raised his eyebrows. "Oh." Jiang Xuning clenched his fists. "I am willing to go to the soup for Mister." Xie Wei sneered, "I'm afraid it's not for Mister, it's just for this stuttering, right?" Jiang Xunning's eyes rolled, but she was like a little fox, squinting her eyes and smiling shyly. "If only Mister in the world does it so deliciously, then it is not the same for Mister or for this stuttering." Xie Wei looked at her for a long time and didn't speak. Jiang Xuning felt that her palms began to sweat, even though she warned herself to be calm. When the corners of her eyes and eyebrows flickered, she still revealed a little uneasiness. Xie Wei stared at her for a long time before he withdrew his gaze and looked at the wine cup in his hand, but suddenly said, "You said, you and Zhang Sha are in love, why can't you be together?" Jiang Xunning's pupils suddenly constricted. The old thing with Zhang Sha is a scar on her body, but Xie Wei's words are a knife, and he picks it open mercilessly. He did it on purpose. Even malicious. Her eyes were cold, and she said, "Lovers don't always be together. The world is unpredictable, and the gap between white porcelain is difficult to bridge. What does it have to do with you?" Xie Wei is really not a good person. Seeing her posture with spikes erected all over his body, his heart is a lot happier, just staring at her gaze, and he can't help but have 3 more points of ridicule. There is a gap in white porcelain. Jiang Xuning clenched her hands. Xie Wei only sneered, threw the wine cup on the table at will, and smashed the ground with a bang. It's two. If you could figure out why you and him couldn't be together, you wouldn't be called Jiangswining, and you wouldn't be sitting here today. This is a cowardly appearance of self-deception and self-deception. He should be told to stand out. He didn't bother to say more useful words to the elm pimple, brushed his sleeves, got up and walked outside, and said, "The more you eat, the more stupid your brain becomes. Lucien and Yu Fangyin are already outside the city, so let's eat it, let's come together." Chapter 209, Lucien's Hostility. Some people speak in a thoughtful way, making people feel like a spring breeze. Some people speak without being mean, and every word provokes people against the scales, and makes people uncomfortable and unhappy. In the past, Xie Wei was the former. After all, the legacy of the ancient sages who are modest and thorough inside and outside the court has won a good reputation. However, in front of her, knowing each other's roots, as soon as the mask was removed, the words became more ruthless and meaner than the other, and there was no concealment. For a moment, her anger was about to bury her, and she felt the urge to question him aloud. "What do you know? What does a cold-blooded and vicious person like you know? You don't know anything." But the almost penetrating look in Xie Wei's eyes when he looked at her inexplicably dissipated her sudden courage. She didn't dare. Jiang Swining sat at the table for a long time before she got up and walked out. Xie Wei stood outside under the eaves and looked at the sky. The strong wind blowing from the north dispels the clouds and haze, and the clear blue sky is like water washing, and it is a rare good weather. Daikon Jianshu saw her first. Xie Wei then turned his head and saw that her eyes seemed to be slightly red, but he didn't say anything, but only waited for her to follow, and then walked out of the house along the corridor. The streets were already full of jubilation. The soldiers stationed near and far were all in the city, some wearing only strong clothes, some wearing light armor, but their faces were all the same excitement. If you listen carefully, you will know that all you are talking about is the grain and grass from outside the city. On the way, there were many people in the city who, like them, were heading in the direction of the east gate, as if they had all gathered to watch the excitement. It was only at this time that Jiang Swining sensed a sense of urgency that the war was imminent from such enthusiasm. Some soldiers in the middle of the road even stopped to salute Xie Wei. Obviously, these days with Yan Lin to patrol the garrison of the garrison, they have really done something. As soon as Yan Lin arrived in Xinzhou, he beheaded the general who was originally in charge of the army, called Wang Cheng. You know, this person is from the Xiao family. Don't care if Yan Lin came with a holy decree, the Xiao family has deep roots, and the personnel changes at the border pass involve vital military power. It doesn't matter if you are transferred, you will directly cut people down when you are transferred. If you let the Xiao family know, how can you spare it? Most of them can't eat and walk around. Of course, ordinary generals did not dare to provoke Yan Lin, who was in full swing, but they were also afraid of the Xiao family, who was originally in charge of the army, and they could not afford to take any of them. Some people are watching from the wall, watching the wind, and not mixing for the time being, while some people are interest-related, just waiting for the overseers sent by the imperial court to arrive, and give Yan Lin a good look. But who would have expected that there would be a danger? A fantasy suddenly came to naught. People are not only the gentlemen of Yan Lin's past, but after arriving in Dexinzhou, there is no sense of checks and balances. Just from the deliberations and banquets of the past few days, you can get a glimpse of the clues. Someone pretended to be unintentional at the banquet to mention that Yan Lin beheaded General Wang Cheng when he arrived. Xie Wei did not react, and he did not mean to investigate or ask more, and within 2 days, he inspected the military camp with Yan Lin, but put his full support for Yan Lin on a posture. Those people who were secretly waiting to watch the play and waiting for Yan Lin's bad luck were all deflated. The right way is that those who know the times are handsome, and whoever still can't see the situation clearly is blind. Therefore, although it has only been 2 days, the atmosphere in the army has simply taken on a new look. Collect the heart, train the soldiers. What's more, some people have quietly speculated whether the Xiao family has lost power, and even the favorite concubine in the palace can't hold it, otherwise how could Xie Wei be sent to supervise the army? How did they know that in fact, from the beginning to the end, there was no holy decree for Yan Lin to take over the military power, and even the original intention of sending Xie Juan to supervise the army was not to support Yan Lin, but to prevent mutiny? It's just that this plan is too bold. Is so bold that people don't even have the idea of suspecting that the holy decree is fake, not to mention that there is an emperor who is in person, which deepens the credibility. Jiang Xuning looked all the way and said that it was fake, not to admire. Just admiration. I can't help but feel palpitations. Seeing that she was about to arrive outside the city gate, she remembered and asked, "Didn't you originally say that Lucien opened the road first, and Fang Yin arrived a few days late?" "But Lucien didn't arrive a while ago, and Fang Yin arrived today a few days earlier than originally scheduled," Xie Wei said. "The heavenly sect is in turmoil, the official road is not easy to follow, and everything has to be taken care of. Maybe something happened in the middle. As long as the grain and grass arrive." He didn't really care what had happened. At the city gate, people were already crowding people next to each other, and people were crowding around. However, when Xie Wei arrived with Jiang Xuning, a soldier on the tower of the city gate saw it, and immediately a team of soldiers came down to open the way for them. Walking through the city gate hole, the scene outside is clear. The procession of transporting grain and grass stretched all the way from the end of the official road as far as the eye could see, and it was obvious at a glance that they were coming from different places. Jiang Xuning even saw the emblems of some businesses in Datong, Shangzi. The army specially allocated a group of soldiers, and after nodding the head of the main book with the account book in his hand and checking it one by one, he pulled these carts into the granary in the city that was specially designed for the army to store grain. Yu Fangyin and Lucien were both standing next to the main book, one of them holding an account book in his hand, and seemed to be bowing his head to say something. The master book was already old, and he was stared at by such two people, and his hand holding the pen was trembling. Lucien almost stared coldly. Yu Fangyin frowned slightly. Her fingers quickly swiped over the handwriting of the account book, and there was an indescribable seriousness in her expression. Jiang Xuning saw from a distance that she was wearing a peacock blue pleated skirt that was already splashed with muddy water, and when she got closer, she found that her fingers were red from the cold, and even had some scars. She frowned and called, "Fang Yin." Yu Fangyin heard this familiar voice, turned her head and saw her. Her eyebrows widened, and she walked over quickly without even putting the account book. "Second girl." Jiang Xuning took her hand and looked at it, and then raised her head to look at her cheeks, only to feel that her whole person had lost weight, and somehow a burst of anger came out of her heart, and she was a little unhappy. "Stay well in Jiangnan, this kind of thing of escorting grain and grass, just ask Ren Weizi to come. What are you doing in person?" Yu Fangyin suddenly sneered. She looked at her expectantly and said, "After discussing with Boss Lu, a lot of grain and grass still have to be allocated in the neighboring state capitals. A few days ago, it rained in Datong, the road was slippery and not easy to walk, and it was so embarrassing on the way to come, and nothing really happened. Don't worry. It's really a habitual tendon. Escorting grain and grass means danger. It's not much safer than her and Xie Wei going to the border on the same road, and she is also a person who has such a big business under her hands. Why don't you even plan for yourself?" Jiang Xuning was angry with her, but she couldn't say anything serious when she saw her like this. In the end, she could only bury her head and wipe the stains on her hands, and said, "Didn't you say that it would only arrive in a few days? Why did you arrive today?" Yu Fangyin looked at her with sparkling eyes. "Her Royal Highness the eldest princess is trapped in Tatar, I am afraid that the situation will get worse day by day. I know that you are worried from the bottom of your heart. If the rear can be prepared this morning, I think you can also start the war as soon as possible, so I rushed on the road. And I heard that you were attacked in the middle of the border pass, and I am also worried about you, and I want to come and see it a day earlier. Zhang Xuning laughed at her for being stupid, but her heart was warm. It's just that Lucien, who was standing not far away, listened to the words of the two in his ears, and he didn't know which wrong tendon he poked, and sneered. Zhang Xuning heard it, and then looked over. In the past, Boss Lu, the profiteer of the secluded pavilion in Beijing, was now embarrassed, and the muddy water on his robe was just a little down, and he was cut a few times by the branches that slanted out of nowhere. When he saw Zhang Xuning, he still had a cold face. He even rolled his eyes, threw the account book he had in his hand at the trembling main bookkeeper's desk, turned around and left. Zhang Xuning couldn't describe the feeling at that moment, right? Enmity. What hostility does Lucien have towards her? Xie Wei didn't come over, just stood on the side and watched. Lucien sneered when he got closer, be kind as a donkey's liver and lungs, and make a wedding dress for others. Xie Wei looked at him. Lucien became more and more impatient, and scolded, the account books of the grain and grass in the Xinzhou management army are not counted at all, and every year used to be bad debts. I brought a lot of people with me, and I'm just going to take them all out and replace them clean. After saying that, he seemed to be even more angry, and turned to go to the city. Xie Wei raised his eyebrows behind his back, your hands and feet are clean. Lucien almost jumped to his feet. Turning his head, his voice was high, Xie Juan. Xie Wei didn't know what he saw, he laughed, and before he said the 4 words cut the robe and break the righteousness, he waved his hand and said, okay, listen to you, change. The curses that didn't come out were all blocked back at once. Lucien was almost suffocated by his words, and it took a long time before he flicked his sleeves vigorously. Why didn't I find out before? You are still a slut. Chapter 210, Jump. Zhang Xuning was really puzzled for a long time, seeing Lucien leaving in a strange way. She couldn't help but think about it, turned her head to look at Yu Fangyin, and suddenly asked, what happened on the road? Yu Fangyin shook her head. Zhang Xuning looked at her, then why did you come together? Yu Fangyin looked at her, her eyes flickered for a moment, and then she lowered her eyes slightly and said, when I first entered the Shangzi realm, there was a lot of chaos everywhere, and the people were still grasping what kind of demon Dao and demon monks were soul-calling. Even if they had money in their hands, it was very difficult to raise grain and grass, and it was far slower than expected. Boss Lu was going to go to the front to open the road first, but he turned back halfway to help coordinate. I heard that he was once a Jinchi and entered the Hanlin Academy, and now some officials in Shangzi province are his old acquaintances, and he can also help with his face. That's why we came together. That's right. Lu Ziyin's credit is not great, his usefulness is not widespread, Xie Juan can't look down on him, and it is impossible for him to sit directly in the position of the head of the household after the success of the previous life. There are many people outside the city, and it is inconvenient to speak. Zhang Xuning didn't ask any deeper, and when she saw that Yu Fangyin came safely, she was relieved a lot. Preparations for war are getting more and more intense. She asked herself if she had any strategic skills. It was nothing more than that she had accumulated a lot of capital in the past 2 years, but almost all of it was handed over to Xie Wei before she came to Xinzhou, and now the smart people in the city are even more grasping. She feels that she can't help much, and it is best not to add to the chaos. So I watched them busy for a while, and then they went back. However, Xie Wei stayed outside the city for a long time, and waited until Yan Lin came from the garrison, and arranged the follow-up of the grain and grass, as well as the arrangement for Lucien's men to take over the accounts in the army, and then returned to the general's mansion. In the evening, a simple dust-washing feast was held. During the banquet, Lucien looked at the situation here, drank several glasses, and came out of the hall with Siewei after the end, and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. For smart people, there is really no useless idle pen. Even if it is a bad move from the original, it can also be turned into a ruthless plan by you. In the end, it is me lose someone who is shallow-eyed, and when you are really lustful, you are not saved. I didn't expect that crazy will be crazy, sick will be sick, and you will not miss the overall situation. Siewei said, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Lucien snorted and didn't explain. His words were vague, but he didn't believe that Siewei didn't understand. Shenzai, the eldest princess of Liang, who came all the way to this level to save what Lao Shizi, was originally a bad move, and she could hardly find any benefits. Lucien has no doubts. If there was no such person as Zhang Xuning in the world, Siewei would not have made such a stupid decision. But there is. Just because he chose this path doesn't mean that he gave up his original plan. Who says you can't have it both ways? From Jinling to Xinzhou, Xie did three things. First, he spread the news that Shenzai, who was originally a top secret, was trapped in Tatar, which attracted the criticism of the people, and even the soldiers in the army knew it clearly. Second, he sent Yan Lin to the border pass, and a false decree allowed Yan Lin to seize military power. Third, he planned what he planned, because Yan Lin left the exiled Huangzhou and got the real holy decree, and came to the border pass to supervise. The army, which not only supported Yan Lin, but also stabilized the morale of the army and accelerated the plan to attack Tatar. If it is finally accomplished, as soon as Xie wins the hearts and minds of the people, it will cause the imperial court to fall into a place of injustice. The second general firmly holds the military power in his hands. Yan Lin is overbearing, and the whole army attacks the Tatars, whether they know it or not. It is nominally a first-class crime of bullying the king and plotting rebellion, and when the head is stretched out and the head is shrunk with a knife, everyone will be tied to the same boat, and it is very likely that they will simply go out and rebel with them. Third, if there is a war at the border pass, the Central Plains Heavenly Sect will inevitably take the opportunity to rise up, and then the court will be worried about internal and external troubles, and it will be difficult not to collapse. Snipe and clam fight, you fishermen sit firmly at the border, get a good name and fortune, and when they are exhausted, then wave their troops to the Central Plains and break through the capital, then the overall situation will be decided. It's just. Lucien couldn't help but look at him. There's nothing wrong with doing such a big thing, but it doesn't please the girl's family. Siewei listened but didn't speak. Lucien thought about it and hadn't figured it out yet. Maybe Xie knew better than himself in his heart. His words might not be an axe and a shame, so he simply closed his mouth and said goodbye when he got to the fork in the road in front of the courtyard. The general's mansion occupies a really large area. The place where he lived was still to the west, so he went all the way down the cloister. But when they reached the front of the courtyard, they heard the sound of small conversations. The border pass is not very peaceful. I think you should not stay here for too long. No matter how the war starts, you will not be able to fight Jiangnan. You just listen to me. Honestly, go back to Jiangnan or Shuzhong after this incident. There is always Lu Zheyin here. He is a person who is in danger. He should work hard and hard. You don't get involved. What about the girl? When I rescue His Highness from Tatar, I will naturally be smeared with oil on the soles of my feet, and I will not bother to mix with their mess. This is the voice of Zhang Xuning and Yu Fangyan. Lucien also mentioned himself when he heard it, and he was not happy in his heart. He should have been in the shadows, waiting for the two of them to finish talking before going out, so as not to embarrass everyone. But inexplicably a breath rushed up, and he was unwilling. So he took 2 steps forward. Zhang Xuning turned her back to him, but Yu Fangyan was facing him, and she saw it at a glance. Luciandeo, second Miss Ning is so right, I should work hard and hard. Jiang Xuning saw him at this time. But thinking about what she said, there was nothing unpleasant to be seen, but seeing Lucien reminded her of some things during the day, so she didn't pay attention to him first, but said to Yu Fang, "You go back to the house first, I have something to say to Boss Lu." Yu Fangyan looked at Lucien with a pair of eyes, as if he hesitated for a moment, but he still listened to Jiang Xuning's words, nodded, and turned to leave. Jiang Xuning was left looking at Lucien. Lucien's gaze withdrew from Yu Fangyan's departing back, but he smiled at Jiang Xuning. "What advice does the second girl have?" "I don't dare to give advice." Jiang Xuning also smiled, and at the same time walked around him 2.5 circles with interest, shaking his head while looking at him, with a little schadenfreude and ridicule. Since ancient times, profiteers have made a good calculation. Why does Boss Lu look at it with such a face, as if he didn't earn his wife and folded his soldiers? Lucien's complexion changed. Jiang Xuning paced with her hands behind her back. The more she pondered Lucien's reaction, the more interesting she felt, and after a while, she stopped and approached him, and suddenly lowered her voice and asked, "Troublesome for a long time, are you interesting to our family?" Lucien sneered with a cold face, "What are you kidding?" Jiang Xuning raised her eyebrows. Lucien added coldly, "A married woman." As soon as he said this, Jiang Xuning's originally relaxed expression disappeared, and the quiet and transparent light hidden under his eyes only said, "It turns out that you also know." It was not easy for Fang Yin and Ren Gongzi to come all the way, seeing that others were good. I think a shrewd person like Boss Lu naturally could weigh the weight, so don't step in sideways. Lucien sneered, "Is it a fake husband and wife?" Now it was Jiang Xuning's turn to be surprised. He actually knew. Lucien didn't bother to explain anything. He flicked his sleeves and left. Zhang Shui was silent for a long time, staring at him, but suddenly had a flash of inspiration and laughed. You are so hostile to me during the day, could it be because Fang Yin cares more about me? You are jealous." She saw Lucien's footsteps stop, and her whole body seemed to be tense for her words. However, in the end, he was able to endure it and did not turn around. As if he really wanted to prove that he didn't care, he didn't look back, and went straight to the courtyard. Jiang Xuning was behind, stroking her palms and laughing, almost bending over with laughter. In the previous life, she was jealous of her too much, but she didn't care. After all, those are women. But in this life, even men are jealous of her. It's so funny. However, Fang Yin is thoughtful and recognizes that people are attendant, although she doesn't know where she and Ren Weizi have gone. But if there is a black-hearted person like Lucien who secretly makes it bad, good things can become bad things. You'll have to guard against him in the future. It's not that Fang Yin has to be willing, it all depends on her happiness. Jiang Xuning just doesn't want her to be unhappy. For a moment, she even wanted to go to Xie Wei's side and give Lucien some eye medicine. But this idea was only a flash and I gave up. Xie Juan is a person who wants to achieve great things, but she just wants to live a simple life. Now he listens to the words in a vain and aggrieved manner, does not annoy him, and follows his wishes. In the final analysis, it is for Shenzai, and he doesn't want to tear his face with him. But now it is almost the extreme of the boundary. If she doesn't know how to advance or retreat, she will press this boundary down by herself, which is tantamount to trapping herself in. At that time, I am afraid that I will not be able to get out of Xie Wei's hands. In any case, being jealous of a man, Jiang Xuning was quite happy. It's just that when I lay down at night, I had a nightmare. This nightmare lasted for several nights. She dreamed that she was standing on a high cliff. The wall was so steep and almost straight that not even the old dead pine trees could take root in the rock face. Ahead lies the abyss. Just one glance ahead, there is a dark ink that you can't reach. There was a strong wind below the abyss, which seemed to come from a ghost, whistling endlessly. She tried to look inside, but she couldn't stand steadily, and a few pieces of gravel fell from her feet down the cliff and into the abyss for a long time, without hearing the slightest echo. So a fear seized her. As if afraid that some monster would emerge from the abyss and devour people, she took a step and was about to retreat behind her, wanting to stay away from the abyss. However, one hand came out from behind her and pressed it on her shoulder, and the other hand was on her waist. The man's breath poured out in her ears, pressed against her cheeks. It was Siawei who cut off her retreat and attached it to her ear. "It's so deep, if you don't jump, how can you know if it's life or death?" "Nope." The power passed from his hands, and he actually pushed her into the abyss in front of her. She screamed instantly. The abyss rushed towards her. She was enveloped in weightlessness, and all her fears were magnified to the limit, causing her to break out in a cold sweat and wake up from this repeated dream again. What echoed in his ears was not the sentence in the dream, but Siawei's mocking sentence not long ago: "If you can figure out why you and him can't be together, you won't be called Zhang Xuning, and you won't be sitting here today." Zhang Xuning's whole person seemed to be fished out of the water. She covered her face with some detachment. It took a long time for the deep fear to be banished. The darkness was like a thread, and it soaked into the house, with a slight chill. The corner of the gauze tent beside the bed was blown away by the wind. A little light filtered through the window paper, vaguely reflecting the figure sitting on the edge of her bed. His quiet voice seemed to merge with the darkness, ethereal as mist. "Did you dream of me?" Zhang Xuning was shocked. She listened to the familiar voice, put down her palm, looked carefully, and saw this figure from the darkness, and for a moment felt that even her heart was grabbed, and she was so frightened that she couldn't speak. Siawei didn't know when he came. He just looked at her, and still asked, "Did you dream of me?" Fang Cai's nightmare still lingers. Zhang Xuning couldn't believe that this person was sitting on the edge of his bed in the middle of the night. "Siajuan, why are you dash?" Siawei's palm gently stroked her cheek, rested it on the tip of her eyebrows, and said, "Ning Er, Shenzai is a member of the royal family, and if he dies, he will die. What does it have to do with me?" There was a chill in those fingers. Zhang Xuning shuddered suddenly. But he didn't say anything more, and after a long time, he slowly withdrew his hand, got up and walked out. The wind blows in, and the gauze tent shakes gently. The cold moon outside is like silver frost. A low and majestic horn came from afar, spreading throughout the 4 fields, adding a touch of the solemn sound of the golden iron horse to this quiet cold night. Zhang Xuning hugged the brocade quilt, and then remembered. Tonight, the war began.